Hello. So over the last few days, I was messaging with a cousin about what meditation is, because I've been sort of doing more meditation and it's been helping me a lot, but it's actually pretty difficult to explain exactly what it is that you're doing. And a lot of explanations about meditation are sort of that whole Buddhist tradition in general are yogis. Generally, it's about awareness and about being. Those kind of explanations don't really satisfy my analytical brain. So I wanted to come up with a better system to explain it in sort of a grounded way in relation to psychology and neuroscience and what it actually feels like and where you're trying to head when you're doing meditation and what's like the ultimate goal. And I think what it comes down to is really like trying to find like this point of balance between different ways of thinking and feeling. The only other way I can explain it is sort of like a center of gravity. And for an object, if you have, more weight up top, more weight down bottom, or left or right, it's more likely to tilt one way or another. Another way you can think of it is when I sit and I have poor posture, I'm like using a lot of my neck muscles to hold my head up, but I'm not actually using my back or like my abs here. That's why I'm slouching over. And then all of the weight is being carried by my neck muscles, which is what tends to cause, headaches and normally causes tension headaches when a lot of these muscles are too tense. But if I sit upright and I drop my chest and I use, elongate my spine, now the forces on my body are very different. And also because the muscles around my neck and chest have relaxed, it actually like opens up my breathing. So the way you use your different muscles affects everything, and they all like interact with each other and they sort of change the balance of forces. And I think meditation is sort of similar in that way, but you're doing it with like your mental modes. There's different parts of your brain that can be more dominant than others. They're the overused muscles, so to speak, and then there are ones that are underused or skills that are underutilized. But I'll explain it better in a little drawing down here. So I'll start off by making a little grid here. And up here is thinking. And this is like when you're in your head and like your voices sort of come out, or I guess if you don't think in voices, you imagine things. But it's the idea of being in your head. And down here is feeling, where you're more like in your body and you're kind of like in your emotions. And there is evidence that your emotions are basically interpretations of signals from your body. And then over here will be internal, and over here will be external. So those are the places where you can put your focus. So you can either think internally inside your head about yourself, or you can think and analyze about things outside in the world. But at the same time, you can have feelings about yourself and your own, ego basically. And versus feeling about the outside world and the people in it and the systems and how you feel about how you fit into the world, essentially. And I think each of these modes causes certain things to happen if you're stuck in them, like when we were talking about that muscle imbalance. If we focus on thinking internally too much, this is when you're overthinking. And this is when that voice in your head sort of takes over and it's constantly nagging at you, and you can't sit for a moment because it's too much and you don't want to listen to it. So you just like whip out your phone or binge some kind of show, and you try not to listen to it. You like distract it because it's doing too much. At the same time, if you're thinking a lot about the outside world, you can overanalyze. And I think of this as being a conspiracy theorist in a way, where you're starting to like find patterns. The world is out to get you, and connecting things where you sort of like just end up believing that's what the case is. A lot of social media is honestly kind of like this, because we're not like official investigative reporters, but we like to think that we know what's going on, or we want to know what's going on. But sometimes that's also like a trap. Down here is when you get overwhelmed. You're basically like flooded by your feelings if this part's too strong. Kind of to the point where like you can't function very well. So if you're kind of overwhelmed by a certain feeling, I guess we have these tendencies to use substances or eat away our feelings. Unfortunately, food is a substance, especially when they're so loaded with sugar and high calories and stuff like that. It is a way of treating our feelings and trying to like push them off, especially when they feel so bad. This is also the corner where if you have more internal feelings, you have panic attacks, or if you can't handle the pain and the hurt that you feel, you might start like raging and attacking others. Road rage is a common example of this, where you kind of like lose all control and it just takes over and just does things. And over here, this is when you're over worried. I think of this sort of reminds me of moms or mom mode, where they're like constantly worried and driven by their worry. And so the helicopter parents just like won't let their kids do anything. They're constantly like telling them they have to be safe and wear their helmet and do this and do that. But if you kind of expand it out into the bigger world, you're constantly worried that someone's threatening you or they feel threatening. You can't trust anybody, or how people will think about you at work, how your friends feel about you, and whether you actually feel loved and whether you're worth relationships, and where can you have somebody that can like love and cherish you. Now don't get me wrong, like this is just kind of how I think your mind works. And it's not that it's all bad. Like thinking and analyzing are good for when you need to study or you need to like reflect on things. Or if you're even doing your work and you're doing your jobs, you kind of have to use your head in that way. At the same time, feelings are also not bad, even though sometimes we tend to try to avoid them. But your feelings are meant to be signals that tell you if you're doing something right or if you're doing something you enjoy. And it helps you like empathize with other people, because when you can understand their feelings, it's a lot of how we connect with other people, right? So it's not necessarily all bad, but I do think that there are certain ways of thinking that become unhelpful. And so when we think about meditation, it's a way of sort of rebalancing those forces, because if any of these are like overly dominant, like for me, for example, I tend to stay in my head a lot more, and then I kind of forget about the feeling part. And then it just sort of like boils over and overwhelms me eventually. So the whole idea of meditation, I believe, is just sort of like figuring out and observing, where do you actually stand in this grid? Are you kind of in one corner versus another? And where's the balance between them? Is it like a little bit stronger this way? Or is it more like down, if you're more like a feeler, is it more dominated by your feelings? But I think the whole idea is to sort of train these different parts of yourself and rebalance them so that you can ultimately sort of focus on the middle, which is when you're just existing. It's a little bit of a weird thing to think about, because normally we're not like really in this mode anymore. Generally, we can understand that we're kind of in one of these corners. But what is it like to not to be thinking and not really feeling? Is you're actually just observing. You're sitting, you're breathing, you're looking at things without any judgments or any sort of labels or any sort of anything other than just seeing and experiencing it for what it is. The air is cold. It feels damp. Your clothes feels rough. My hands are tense or they're relaxed. You just like are in the moment. And that's what a lot of meditation teaches, is to be present. I think it's the same thing for internal versus external. I think we can get stuck inside our heads a lot and inside of our bodies, where we're too focused on everything that's going on within. Or you can get stuck just focusing on, your jobs and your relationships and taxes, money and all that stuff out in the world. when we kind of just exist, it doesn't matter either way. You just understand that those things are there. And again, you do it without any sort of judgment. You just know that in this current moment, I am sitting in my chair. My posture is a certain way. And at the same time, you're looking inside of your head and understanding, like, where are you kind of in this space? And can you move closer to this sort of neutral point where everything is balanced and just sit there and not have to do anything for a little while? And I think that's really what meditation boils down to. So if I bring these back, meditation is ultimately about understanding your sort of strengths and weaknesses inside your head and like really looking and seeing where you are in this space. Because if certain ones are too dominant or too strong, you end up relying on them. It's kind of like your muscles. And the more you rely on it and the weaker the other ones are, for example, then it creates like a feedback cycle where they're too weak to rely on. So you keep forcing yourself and you keep using the same muscles over and over again, which sort of sticks you into this strange posture. If you have bad posture at your computer, you're just constantly going to have it because you will never develop the muscles to let you sit up straight and relieve all of that tension. The same thing happens in your mind. You want to balance out the forces so that you can just sit here in a place without any tension. This also gives you the benefit of being able to move into any space freely without feeling like you have to sort of default to one, or that your brain tends to default to one. And when you need some of these other skills, you don't have them available. So that's what I think meditation actually is. It's sort of like achieving this balance by learning to sit in your existence and not really do anything. And it's not really like a cure-all, because even if you identify, like for me, I did notice that I was sort of in my head more and I tended to think and analyze a little bit too much. And I tried to reason away my feelings, so I didn't do that anymore. It doesn't automatically fix things, but it made me realize that that bridge was broken. And so I started paying attention to my feelings more, and I did understand that it was so much of it was bottled away and it was so strong that I couldn't actually face it directly. Ultimately, I think meditation is really a way of studying yourself and studying the balance of the forces within your head and who's winning and who's weaker and who wants attention, who needs compassion, and who needs to like learn to let go a little bit of its control. And ultimately, there's so many different ways of doing that, really. Kind of like there's so many different ways of fixing your posture or exercising or developing your muscles in your body, that this is just one way of doing it. You don't necessarily have to sit there. But I do think that it is very helpful to like reach this point of neutrality in the middle, where everything feels balanced and you don't have this constant like tension and pull everywhere. So I don't know if that made any sense, but there we go. This is my explanation for what I think meditation is. And if you have any ideas or thoughts or whatever, I'd like to hear it. And I'll try making more of these explanation videos. I do have a more like technical way of explaining based off of like neuroscience why these things are the way they are. But it felt a little bit overkill for this video. So yeah, maybe I'll save that for next time. Anyways, thanks.